Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Adams, and I am substituting for our chairman of this committee, the Audit and Compliance Committee, and would like to call the meeting to order. And we will have a roll call.
Trustee Adams.
Here.
Trustee Johnston.
Here.
Trustee Karbowiak. Trustee Smith. Mr. Chairman, we only have 2 members present, so we do not have a quorum, and the committee cannot entertain any official business, meaning it cannot vote on any items.
Okay. So it's really maybe just simply described as an informational meeting?
Right. All the informational items can be heard and considered.
Okay. So we will go through the meeting just like a regular meeting. It's just that there will not be a vote. Correct.
And we'll defer voting on the minutes until the next meeting where there is a quorum.
Okay.
So you can proceed to item 5.
Okay.
Well, or remarks.
Any member have a question? No good. Okay. All right. So we move on down the agenda. Let me make this comment first before moving on down. I feel like I'm going through an education all over again sometimes when I review our report, which is so informational, and just like to haven't seen Brenda's report yet, but I know how it always will be. Very good. So we'll get into those as we move through the agenda. We do not approve the minutes, right?
Correct.
So the annual report, which is tab 3. I'm sorry. Annual report tab 2.
Right in the face.
Too many pieces of paper.
Thank you, Trustee Adams. Behind tab 2 is the 2018 annual report for audit and consulting services, along with information on trends and emerging issues. For trends and issues, I shared the 2017 summary list of news stories involving higher education institutions prepared by the Auburn University Office of Audit, Compliance, and Privacy. The top area where issues were noted was compliance legal, followed by campus life safety, IT security, fraud, and ethics. The annual report is required by state law, the board bylaws, and the board policy on board committees. Last year, a summary page was requested. The report includes a 1-page summary with references to more details or charts within the report. I apologize that your copy of the report may not include all the referenced page numbers, but in the process of preparing the meeting materials, the report page numbers were removed from the headers, and we'll work to correct that in the future. The audit effort focused on required projects, consulting work, and investigations within the divisions of academic affairs, governance, athletics, marketing and communications, student affairs, and financial management. The status of the 2018 audit plan is also included in the annual report. Our office also coordinated the preparation of the meeting materials for this committee. The resource allocation for audit and consulting services is also presented in the annual report. The Audit and Compliance Committee is responsible for ensuring the audit function has adequate resources. The 2018-19 budget is adequate to fulfill the current responsibilities. A proposal and request for resources will be developed this year to increase the information technology audit coverage. The 2019 audit plan is also included in the annual report. The plan includes the required projects, projects in progress, and requested audit concerning the use of university aircraft. The The plan also includes a self-assessment of the internal audit function in preparation of a quality assurance review that is required by the Institute of Internal Auditor Standards. That concludes my comments on the annual report.
Okay. Any questions, members? Okay, shall we move on to the quarterly report?
And tab 3 is the quarterly results of internal audit reports. The Confucius Institute Contract Departmental Review was issued with 2 recommendations. Management has taken corrective action to improve the cash receipting process and agreed to the business office reviewing the year-end financial report prior to submission to the external funding agency. And the year-end cash accounts were completed with no reportable issues. And that concludes my report on the quarterly report of audit results.
Okay. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Brenda, so that means the 2 clarifications are cleared off the 7 that were outstanding? There's only 5 outstanding? In the carryover report prior?
Yes, that would be correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
Right.
Anything else? Thank you.
Compliance. Yeah. Trying to find them first.
The last tabs.
4. Right here.
That's compliance, that's what we're.
Okay. We are moving down to tab 4, which is nearly halfway through the book, which is the compliance report. Okay. Yes. If she's already at the platform. Good. And Dr. Stevens, good
to see you.
see you today, and look forward to your report. Yes.
Thank you all, and good afternoon. First, because there were questions about the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, I'm presenting first on that information. So as you know, the EU General Data Protection Regulation became effective May 25th of 2018. And if you recall, earlier in the year, or perhaps even last year, I talked a little bit about the EU GDPR. And essentially what the GDPR is a regulation that protects European Union citizens' data protection. It also requires that those European citizens be told what will occur with their data and the use of their data. And it also requires that we provide them with an option to consent to the use of their data. So that is just a general synopsis of the regulation for those of you who may not remember all of the information about the EU GDPR. In addition, the EU GDPR applies even to organizations that may not have a physical presence in the EU. So if we market to EU citizens or EU citizens use our services, then we fall under the EU GDPR's regulations. And so that is why MTSU prepared for this. So while we don't directly market to EU citizens, we don't have a physical presence, we do have international students who are EU citizens, and we also do have some employees. And in addition, to ensure that we are protecting all of our student data in addition to the EU citizens' data, we've done a couple of things to ensure compliance with the regulation. And so the following outlines some of those items that we've instituted as a result of the effective date of EU GDPR. We have a web page, and I'm going to just put that up. That is part of the web page, and I'll get to that screen in a minute. But we have a webpage with the terms, the GDPR terms. It's on the president's page, as well as on my department's webpage, the Office of Compliance and Enterprise Risk Management. There's also a link to GDPR terms on all MTSU web pages, and that's found at the bottom of a lot of the pages, and you'll find it under the university non-discrimination policy language. We also have information about GDPR on the program pages. So where it talks about apply now, it gives the employee or a student applicant the option of telling us if they are a EU citizen. So they check a box and then they see the EU terms. We also have an internal database that captures this information, and I want to thank the Information and Technology Division, who's worked very diligent with me to get this information up and running. And so we're able to track the number of EU citizens who may check that box, just so that we have an idea of what the numbers are. We also, Information Technology provides me with security reports on a quarterly basis so that I can see information about any of our data security incidents. And then we, as part of the regulation requires that there be a designated data protection officer. And so I am designated as that data protection officer, and we also have a dedicated email address that's monitored daily in case there are any questions about our preparations or any of the data that we have. And finally, in Article 35, Clause 3 of the EU GDPR, and there are a lot of articles in this regulation, the regulation requires that we provide data protection impact assessments and privacy impact assessments. Now, typically, if we were monitoring systematically large-scale data from EU citizens, or we were profiling citizens, EU citizens, as based on services that we might provide, then we would have to do these data protection impact assessments. But none of the three main requirements of doing those DPIAs are actually applicable to MTSU. However, all of the other items that we're already doing, I think more than complies with the regulation. And so ITD also continues to do its security penetration testing. And just recently, ITD also did a disaster recovery tabletop exercise, which involves looking at the ways that we secure our data in the event that there is a natural disaster or some other kind of disaster. And so I attended part of that training exercise and felt comfortable that we were fully prepared to protect the data not only of EU citizens who are students and employees, but also of all of our students and employees. And so what follows are screenshots of what some of those pages look like. So you'll see in your booklets the actual MTSU European Union citizen page. And then if you flip, you will also notice that there is the application information page that students will see if they are also an EU citizen. And then the third page, if you flip to it, it asks the individual if they are a European Union citizen, and if that box at the bottom is clicked, then the next page demonstrates what they will see. And then what is up on the screen is just a summary of the number of European Union students that we have so far and that we've captured. And what happens is in working with the great support that I receive from ITD, on a monthly basis, by the 29th of every month, I receive data regarding the number of European citizens that have either become students or they are applicants or employees. And to date, we have 9 students. And as you can see, they're from Sweden, the United Kingdom, Italy, Finland, France, and Germany. And then we have 2 employees from Estonia and the Netherlands. So again, this will be updated on a monthly basis so that we can keep track of this information. On the next and last page, this is a program page. It says Accounting BBA, and it just gives you an idea of what the checkbox looks like. If you look on the right-hand side, it says, I am a citizen of the EU and I agree to MTSU GDPR's terms. So when the individual clicks on that link, it pulls up the terms of EU GDPR so that they can see what they're consenting to and how we use their data. And just as an aside, most organizations, whether they are academic institutions or they are private or large corporations, provide some kind of information about how data is used by people who are using their services. And that concludes this part of my presentation. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Trustee Payton.
So if a citizen that applies under the GDPR, do they have to check that box in order to, well, not necessarily do they have to check that box, but is it just our responsibility to have that box there for them to check? Because let's say they don't check that box. Is their data still shared like U.S. citizens' data would be shared? They're just not informed of that?
No, so let me make sure I understand your question. Are you asking if someone who is an EU citizen chooses not to check the box?
Yes.
Will we be able to capture their data? And the answer is no. So that is why we have this information in so many places, to give individuals an opportunity to tell us. For student applicants, if they tell us that if they click the box and tell us that they're an EU citizen, then they continue on with the application process, right? But they also have to consent because the EU GDPR requires that consent. Now, I will tell you that while we see 9 students and 2 employees there, the back-end database shows and indicates that we have a number of students who clicked the box just thinking that they were supposed to, right? And so we have probably hundreds of names that are actually U.S. citizens, and so we parse through that. And while we are looking at the process and all of the check boxes and the process for this, right now this seems to be the most feasible way for us to at least even get some of that data. But what we are finding is that those who click the box then go on to click that they are consenting.
Let me follow up on that question just for clarification. So an employee is hired and either by choice decides not to click inform us.
That they're
Is it
an
our, yeah, is it, whose responsibility?
Whose responsibility is it
Yeah,
to?
to make sure that we're in compliance, and let's say we share information, not knowing that person, well, knowing and that person saying, I don't want to click the box, or not knowing.
So I'm responsible for the compliance, but if your question is if we have an employee, because the employee side, the HR side has a different database, and we use an outside vendor to help us with that. And so if an employee applicant decides not to click the box that they're an EU citizen, then unfortunately that's data that we won't be able to capture. And that also means that that particular applicant will still likely go through the process, but we won't have a way of truly capturing if that person is not telling us that they're an EU citizen. So they have to voluntarily, they being the applicants, the employee applicant or the student applicant, they have to voluntarily tell us that they are an EU citizen. And then once they do, we ask them to consent to the information and the use of their data. Now, if they decide not to consent, then it kicks them out of the system as if they're not applying.
If they don't tell us, we don't have any liability, though. If they don't tell us and their data.
Correct. They have to voluntarily tell us.
That
Correct.
was my, just
Okay.
my, yeah,
Okay.
great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Stevens, and I guess you stay at the remain at the podium. Okay.
Yes.
Tab 5.
Thank you, Trustee Adams. The next section is about our records management reporting and our records retention processes. In 2017, the State Records Management Division amended some of its procedures and requires all publicly funded institutions to ensure their compliance with Tennessee Code Section 425-101. The RMD also has additional procedures that they want all state agencies to follow in order to retain and manage records. And so to ensure our compliance with the state and also the Records Management Division, we've addressed this in a number of ways. We have procedures for maintaining the inventory of all of our agency records. We also have destruction procedures and documentation. We have internal agency training that we've done, and this year we did 3 to 4 trainings just in July, but that is not including individual trainings with departments and divisions that happen throughout the year. We also, as part of those seminars, discuss classification numbers, record storage and destruction, the different records types, and some of the state's other reporting procedures. We also had to submit what's called a records holding report, and we had to do so by June 30th, although this year the RMD did change that date to August 1st, but we still held to the June 30th date. And then we have to designate a records officer, and later in this presentation, you'll learn that the records officer is Ms. Carol Lewis, who's in the audience right now. Ms. Lewis has done an excellent job in not only facilitating a lot of the training, but also helping all of the individuals and departments and divisions across the campus to learn about our internal processes, as well as a database that we created. And again, we created that with the help of ITD, so I can't thank them enough for their help with helping us create what we needed and then making that database a reality. So on June 20th, my office submitted the records holding report on behalf of MTSU, and the Records Management Division provided us an acknowledgement of that report. And then on July 12th, 2018, we were told that the state's RMD uploaded our records holding report successfully. And in addition to that, there are some other things that we've done to enhance our records retention processes. And again, I mentioned the designation of a records officer. Ms. Lewis is also our Director of Financial Compliance, so she's doing 2 roles, the Director of Financial Compliance and also the records officer. And again, she's done an excellent job. And she is also, we also have support from Hector DeCollar, who is a recent MTSU graduate, and he's also been helping with records retention, among other things, as well as Beth Todd, that's in the Office of Business and Finance. I mentioned the annual training. We also decided to do some smaller ongoing training sessions throughout the year. Again, as I mentioned, we do have a database that we use, and that all of our records coordinators that are represent each of the departments and divisions, they are able to use the database and to input our records. We also have annual records destruction periods, and that was a recommendation also by the Records Management Division. We began those annual destruction days last year, and we've continued it this year. And so this year, our destruction dates are October 22nd through the 23rd. And then, again, we have additional resources on my office's website under records retention. So there are a number of resources along with policy resources. And then finally, we have a dedicated email address. So as individuals or departments or records coordinators have questions about how to manage their records, retain their records, destroy their records, or even classify certain records, they can send an email to either Ms. Lewis directly, or they can send it to our general email address of rdaretention@mtsu.edu, and Ms. Lewis monitors that email address. And the next part of the presentation is simply just a copy of the records holding report that you C with all of the details. And I need to add that due to the great work of Hector Del Collar and Beth Todd, as well as Ms. Lewis and myself, a lot of the documentation that we provided to the state for this year had to be manually done. However, as part of some of the process improvements we've made for this year, now the database that we have will be able to capture a lot of the data so that we won't have to make manual calculations of all of the different types of records that we have on file. And then the next page is simply the acknowledgement that we received from Director Kevin Callaghan of the state saying that he was able to successfully upload the report into the system. And I want to add that we received compliments from the State Records Management Division because we ensure that we constantly keep Mr. Callaghan informed, and we also regularly communicate with him whenever we have questions. And we provided the report in advance of the due date. Are there any questions?
As much paperwork that flows on in this institution, do we maintain record storage off campus, or is everything maintained on campus?
Currently, we have records. We have a warehouse. Now, there are some agencies that actually house and store their records using one of the state's vendors. But because we have such a large campus, a lot of our records are electronic also. And so we've scanned a lot into our system. We also have, again, a warehouse, and then we also have university archives. So right now, unless I'm incorrect, and I don't think I am, we have our records on campus. And although there is the opportunity to use the state's vendor, there's no need to at this time. Any other questions?
We'll move to tab 6. And Dr. Stevens will continue.
So this information is about our UAS drones policy, the unmanned aircraft system. We talked a little bit about this last year and the need for this because we previously had requests for students and other individuals to fly drones on campus. And because we have various regulations that protect the privacy of students as well as others, we needed to create a policy around this. And I particularly want to thank Douglas Campbell, who is the operations manager of UAS in the aerospace program. We have an excellent, outstanding, I think, world-class aerospace program that I truly don't believe any other program can match it. And then Assistant General Counsel Sandra Wade also was very instrumental in helping to draft this policy and the General Counsel's office to get all of our public comments. So I want to thank Heidi Zimmerman and also Ms. Wade for the work of their office. So as you can see here, some of the things that we have done to ensure that we can at least have some semblance of documentation as well as tracking of those individuals who want to fly drones on our campus. We created policy 785 to ensure that we can ensure the safety of students and employees and visitors with regard to UASs and drones. And some of the other things that we require any applicants to do or to provide to us, we ask them to provide their registration number of the drone. We also ask them to provide their pilot certificate number, and then the name of the pilot in command, which is incredibly important. We need to know who's in command of the drone. And then we ask them also for a description of the flight plan, which is also important so that we ensure that we know where they're flying the drone and for what purpose. And so what you see in the next page is the actual copy of the application for the unmanned aircraft systems, which just provides you some of the information that we receive. And when I say we, I mean my office as well as the provost's office.
Yes, sir.
So,
Trustee Freeman.
Speaking as a pilot, where do you get a flight plan for a drone? How do you file a flight plan for a drone?
So it isn't so much that you file the flight plan, is that you present the flight plan with your application to us. And that flight plan can just tell us where you plan to fly the drone, how low you plan to fly the drone, and in what areas.
Oh, okay. So when I think flight plan, it's for a specific time
Okay.
of day and where you're going and when it's going to end. So this particular flight plan is somebody tells you at the beginning of the year, I plan to fly my drone over by Cummings at 200 feet, and that's it.
So the flight plans, so far, we've received 2 applications. And those flight plans have actually included the times, the date of the flight, where they were going to fly it, how low they were going to fly it, when it was going to end, along with all of the other information that we included in the
Gotcha.
application.
Okay. So every time they fly it, they must file a flight plan.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Okay. And then the next document that you see is simply a checklist that we use internally to ensure that when we review the application and yes, sir.
Go ahead. No, you finish. I'll ask my second question.
Not a problem. And then this checklist is just what we use internally to initially review the application to ensure that it at least has some of these main components.
So the flight plan is filed with you?
So,
Where do you file this flight plan?
so the application, along with all of the other documentation that we ask for on the application, and the flight plan can be given to the provost's office if it's for academic purposes, or if it's for commercial purposes, it can be submitted to the Office of Business and Finance, and I will get that information and review the information. Both Mr. Campbell and I are responsible for reviewing and approving these applications. So for example, I know from last year that you have a drone, or you said you have a drone. So if you submitted an application to us, then I would review your application and I would review the flight plan. And I would then provide you with approval or ask you for additional information, sir.
Okay. Well, just a note, as a pilot, we can file flight plans on our phone
Okay?
and get approval from the FAA right away, like instantly.
Okay?
And so if there's a drone pilot on campus, he or she having to file a flight plan and waiting for approval is going to be somewhat unusual and very different from the way filing flight plans for flying your own airplane.
Okay.
So,
Are you talking about, this is for both drones and for,
no, I'm saying, so I don't know anything about drones, but I'm
Okay,
saying when
right.
when you file a flight plan as a pilot
as a pilot, right? Mhm.
in a larger aircraft, you file it instantaneously with the FAA, and you get approval right away.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to figure out if a young person wakes up tomorrow morning and says, I want to fly my drone on campus,
Can they do it instantly?
can they file a flight plan immediately and you respond back to them immediately? And okay,
They have to provide us with the application 14 days in advance.
okay. That's kind of how they
What
do
would
it
be the
here.
penalty if somebody failed to do that? Somebody didn't know, took a drone, sent it up. What would be their penalty if they did not comply?
Well, first, we'd have to know about that, and so if someone were flying a drone and we had knowledge of that, then they would be in violation of the policy. And so there are, in the policy, there is information regarding what would happen for violation, and so that includes disciplinary action and/or termination, and that is in Section 5 of the policy.
I don't think, you're not saying we're against people flying drones on campus. I think what you're saying is you want them to file a flight plan.
Want to know?
Right, and I think what I'm saying is, if you're not against people flying drones on campus, the process shouldn't take, a flight plan shouldn't take 4 or 5 days to get approval. It should be, we should be a little bit more efficient in that regard.
Okay. I will certainly...
Just for your consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will certainly work with Mr. Campbell in aerospace. I think because drones and UAS aircrafts is his specialty. I think as we talked about this process as well as the policy, and again, we're just talking about drones, we're not talking about the larger aircrafts, we thought it was necessary to at least have 14 days in advance. Because, for example, if a commercial vendor wanted to utilize their drone and needed to utilize their drone to, say, survey the campus, we still want to know,
Of course,
that they're going to be utilizing their drone. And because there are also other regulations related to student privacy, such as FERPA, it's also important for us to know. It's very possible that we could reduce the time from 14 days to something else, especially since for larger aircrafts and for pilots, you all get instant approval. But I think this process at least helps us to document and to at least get around, or at least have some sort of plan for knowing who will be utilizing drones. One other example is that we had someone last year who asked to use a drone, and we didn't have a process. We didn't have a policy, and it happened to be a student alumni. And he wanted to use the drone just for recreational purposes. And he wanted to use the drone over a part of campus that was heavily trafficked by students. And so in writing the policy and also the application as well as the checklist, we had to consider all of those things to ensure that at least we had something that we could say we could approve. And again, Mr. Campbell is very well versed in the FAA regulations, just as you are as a pilot.
So let me just share with you this. I applaud what we're doing here. This is awesome that we're doing it. But I just wanted to give you some comparison to how it works at the FAA with other pilots, so that if you have a person that's a pilot and flies a drone, it's going to seem unusual to wait 14 days. So 14 days is fine with me. I'm just letting you know that you may get some pushback because oftentimes, I mean, I can file a flight plan right now and
get it approved.
Regent Freeman, we certainly will take that under consideration, but keep in mind this is new technology. And level of safety, and I know the federal government has some very strict, very similar kind of guidelines. Certainly we can look at the time frame, but with the history and tradition and length of time you've been flying airplanes with the drones, I certainly don't want them to be coming around COPE, and I don't know what's happening a couple of days in advance.
And I think you may want to have a more restricted policy than just file put in the application and you can go fly a drone. I mean, it may need to be more restrictive than that, because they are dangerous objects, and in the hands of the wrong people can take pictures of things that we don't want shown.
Absolutely.
And so my first point was just letting you know that the difference between what your policy and what a regular pilot would experience.
Absolutely.
But secondly, it may need to be some more restrictions as it relates to drones on campus.
And we'll definitely take a look at both of your recommendations, Trustee Freeman. And I am aware that some drones also can carry weaponry.
Yes.
So that's also something that is important.
If there are no other questions, the chair has asked me to sit in for him. He had to leave for a couple of minutes. So can you go to the next item,
Sure.
please?
The next item is about ethics compliance, and this is just to further strengthen our compliance program as well as our risk management program. And so some of the activities that are listed here are that we created an ethics investigation case log for internal and external complaints concerning employee ethics violations. We also have an investigation process that includes data collection, interviews, as well as an acknowledgement that's provided to the employee, which the employee signs, and any recommendations that are necessary to the employee's division vice president, their immediate manager, and or their department chair. We also have, in addition to that, I've created an ethics compliance webpage for my department that provides additional resources for employees. And then we're working on an actual ethics training that all employees will be required to take annually. We're trying to keep it to 7 minutes. It has just a few review items, and we're working. We already have the items in the presentation. We're just trying to animate a few items to make it very user-friendly. And again, we want to keep it to 7 minutes because we know our employees are inundated with lots of training. So that is the information about the ethics, and what you have in your booklets is a snapshot of the ethics compliance page on the Office of Compliance and Enterprise Risk Management's website.
Any questions? Okay, let's move to the next item. Thank you.
And so the last public item is in relation to, well, the next to the last public item is in relation to some of our compliance and risk management tools. One of the latest tools is an institutional compliance calendar that pulls in all of the regulatory reporting across all divisions of MTSU. And I ask the divisions to update this twice a year. And so what you see on the screen is just a snapshot of what that compliance calendar looks like. It provides you with a description of whether or not the report is required, the frequency, the due date, and the department and the division and the agency that report goes to. So that is just one of the tools that is utilized to help maintain our compliance and risk management. And you also have a snapshot of that compliance calendar in your materials.
Any questions? Yeah, most of this is informational item, so can you move to the next item? Thank you.
Sure. The last public item is regarding monitoring and testing. Last year, we talked about the Department of Justice's Philip factors. There were several of them, 10 of them to be exact. And the Department of Justice provided these as a way to help organizations mitigate their risks of being in non-compliance with certain regulations. And it also gives organizations a way of looking into, of understanding what the Department of Justice actually looks at when they are trying to determine liability. And so one of the questions that came up last year, as I recall, was about the ways that we meet those factors and the ways that we monitor and test our compliance program and risk management program. And so what follows is a list of some of the things that we are doing. We have developed, and so some of those things include databases for documentation of our procedures and benchmarking as needed, improvements of procedures to enhance student safety when in contact with outside consultants or outside entities, mandatory background checks on coaching staff, and also mandatory background checks of outside consultants, and those outside consultants are sometimes used with our student organizations. We also have been doing review and testing regularly of data security protocols, firewalls, and other vulnerabilities related to our cybersecurity. We also perform annual risk assessments and risk management reporting. We also do financial audit testing, which is usually handled by our Office of Audit and Consulting Services. And then an annual risk assessment consultative report that is done annually that discusses our improvements and enhancements, and that's actually in process now for this year. We also have a committee that reviews conflict of interest cases for the university. And again, as I mentioned previously in the section about ethics, we also provide tracking of ethics cases. And then on a monthly basis, my office issues compliance tips related to risk management and our overall control system. And that includes topics about combating fraud, waste, and abuse, records management, and other topics. And then twice a year, I put out a compliance newsletter in October and in February on compliance topics. So those are the ways that we not only monitor and test our compliance and risk management program, But those are some of the activities that we do.
So your newsletter would go to staff, faculty?
To all employees, yes, sir.
Digital,
Yes.
that type?
Absolutely. And the newsletter actually is also on my department's webpage. And it can be found under the Other Resources tab, so you see the electronic format of the newsletter.
Yep.
So I welcome you to take a look at your convenience. Are there any other questions?
Okay, Dr. Stevens, thank you very much. Yeah. Trustee Baker, I think maybe you got an answer to where part of the knowledge is stored on this campus and paperwork.
Right. There has to be a lot. You do?
I got some more drone questions. No, just kidding.
Okay. All right, the portion
Thought Doc would get a kick out of that.
of the committee meeting in a public session is now completed, and we will now go into executive session for discussion concerning audits and investigations. No business other than these items will be considered during this non-public session. The public meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee is hereby adjourned.